Really happy to be here, finally. For those of you who don't know, we did a trip from Cologne to Porto. I was asked by the COVESA organizers, hey, do you want to moderate a panel on EV charging and talk a little bit about some of the work we've been starting last year? I said, yeah, but it has, I was thinking about how to make this special, how to kind of, not only talk about data and how data can kind of help with all the customer pain points that we're all seeing in the industry, but how can I make this more real, right? Let's not only talk about this, let's bring it closer to everybody, right? So we decided, let's do a trip to the event. Obviously, we took our Mach E. Not gonna sell it to you, promise. If you're interested in the full story, go to LinkedIn. We did a series the last few days, really posting everything, all of our experience we had on the way. Peter was my co-driver, so thanks to Peter. Put your hands up really quick. So if you want to talk to us later on. So let me talk about the trip. So of course we were super excited to do this, and I said, well, that's easy, right? There are a lot of chargers out there. There are a lot, right? And all the charging networks are promoting, we have 300,000 chargers. The next one is telling you we have 400,000 chargers. But if you kind of look into it, yeah, right? And you kind of, what kind of charging do you prefer? Obviously, you don't want to use 25 chargers that only output 22 kilowatts on your way to Porto, right? So consider this a long distance holiday drive with your family, right? You want to get there quick, right? So yes, there are enough chargers, and I said, okay, that doesn't look too bad. And so let's take a look at Google Maps. Maybe we take a couple of detours off the main roads to get a little bit more anxiety into the game. What was depressing, it told me I should take the flight. All right. So I had to convince Peter. I didn't show him this, so he didn't have a chance to say no. Well, then the project was born. We said, okay, very simple. Let's do an amazing project for the conference, and give a little bit of motivation to the topic. Let's really show what this is all about. We said, okay, very easy. 2,300 kilometers, 5 EU countries, probably around 10 charge stops. It's going to take us 2 to 3 days. Matt asked me yesterday, did you guys actually do any technical work? Yes, of course we did, right? So yeah, we compared a lot of apps, obviously, compared it to our system. We did a lot of internal learnings, and I think there are a lot of great apps out there. Some of them do things right, some of them do things differently, right? And you can learn from each other, right? So I'm a techie, and obviously Peter is as well, so we had to create data. And one outcome that I want to share, there seems to be some sort of a correlation between super high charging power and super bad coffee. And the curve looks like this. Obviously, you cannot have coffee quality 0 means there's no charger, right? So if you're in the middle of Italy, somewhere in a little town, right? Best coffee you will probably ever have, but you can't charge, right? The good thing is, the higher the charging power, you will always get coffee. Right? The question is, what kind of coffee? And we call this the instant plateau. So there's always instant coffee around, right? And the best stuff you can really get is in the worst places that you don't want to get stuck, and I'll get to that in a minute. This might sound funny, but the message I want to give here is the experience on charging and the way we travel will change, right? So you can't sit in, you probably won't get into the car with your family, drive 16 hours straight and you're there, and you have to fuel up once, and I'll tell my kids, okay, go to the bathroom, 5 minutes, we're gone, we're out of here, right? And you just keep driving. So the way we travel will eventually change, right? And the experiences customers will expect around the charging points will have to evolve as well, right? So, and this is not enough, right? Another pattern that we saw, there's a lot of trash on these chargers, right? Another point that shows, well, it's not only about the charging, it's around how does this charging site look like, right? People talk about safety, right? Okay, well, we'll end up here in the middle of the night. Can I go there, right? Like things like that, and those become very obvious. And I'm probably not telling you anything new, but the trash was something that surprised me personally. Who of you recognizes this symbol? Only you? Nobody else? Wi-Fi, right? Remember the days where, and I think Gerald was talking about this morning, when you were backpacking the world, right? So do you remember the days when you got all excited to see this and say, oh, there's free Wi-Fi, like there's a Starbucks, right? And you chose to go to that particular location because there was free Wi-Fi, right? Yeah. Today it's irrelevant, right? It's irrelevant. Who of you recognizes this symbol? You do, I know. He does, I know. You guys do. Nobody else. My parents would say it looks like an on-off symbol tilted to the side. Yeah. But actually, that's the official symbol for plug and charge. Nobody knows this stuff, right? Do you feel excited when you see this? You felt excited when you saw this 20 years ago, right? You picked that particular location to go there and charge up, right? It's plug and charge, yeah. Plug and charge is basically a certificate-based authorization between the charging point and your vehicle, right? So you just plug it in, it charges, you plug out, off you go. You get a bill in the background, right? Right. So I think people talk about this a lot, but do customers really see this, right, as a differentiating factor? Yes, it's convenient, but it's also convenient to just push the app and activate the charger if it works. I think the customer just cares, does it eventually work, right? Yes, it's convenient, but I really like this example because does that make a difference that I go to that particular charger, not this one? I think there needs to be more to that, right? So that's something we noticed, and somebody mentioned, you mentioned it, Ionity as a very positive example, right? So yeah, not always, yeah. So we saw broken chargers, we saw chargers that were out of order. We also used non-Ionity chargers, obviously, that were super confusing, right? How do I activate now this one? You would say I have to, touch 1 and 2, but it was a mess. It was in a different language. You were not able to set it to the language you understand. It was telling you something. Essentially, it worked, but those are the little things that make a difference. And that's Peter giving a thumbs down. Yeah. Well, let's talk about workarounds. I'm a big fan of design thinking, and workarounds are excellent to learn about, customer behaviors. And people will find workarounds, right? It's amazing what you will see when you start looking at customer behavior and then put those learnings into your own product. So we saw a lot of Teslas at Ionity chargers. That's a workaround for something, right? But we also saw a lot of non-Tesla vehicles at Tesla chargers, right? Obviously, that's a famous issue with the cable length. Probably some of you know this who are driving EVs. Was solved here, right? So little things like that, or people using apps to translate what's on the screen, right? People are finding workarounds, right, for all these things. Yeah, and me in the rain, charging up, getting wet, right? That's another one. All right, let's get serious. So let's get a little bit more into what I call the desert. So our route basically took us from Cologne to Bordeaux through France, which was super easy. You have a lot of Ionity chargers, like there's a lot of infrastructure when you're kind of sticking to the main routes. When you get to Spain, not so much anymore. It's less, but it's still there, right? Now we stayed at the city called Gijón, as I learned, probably not saying it right. And we deliberately chose not to take the safe route. So we said, okay, we're not going to play it safe, right? We're here to learn something. So we took this route over Lyon to Porto, and there was no Ionity charger. There was one just charger up here. And we always ran into the issue, for example, that the hotels we were staying at, they didn't have a charger. So we ended up always finding a charger in the morning, right, to juice up and then keep going. And then eventually, something terrible happened. And who of you have felt real range anxiety in your life? Doesn't matter if it's an ICE vehicle or an EV vehicle. Okay, so let's do a little quiz. Who would be comfortable with a, let's say, 20 kilometer distance to empty on your tachograph? 20? Yeah? No? More than that? What's more than 50? Really? You shouldn't be driving an EV then.
My wife is a different story.
Who would, Who would be comfortable with 10? Less than 10, not so much. And it depends on what you see. So we made a bad choice because there was no charger left, only one. And the system told us, oh, you reached a critical distance. You need to go to this charger. There's nothing else around you. I said, oh, all right. And it kept telling us, go back, go back, go back. And we ignored it. And it said, okay, there's only one left, nothing else. You have to go there. I said, all right. And it took us on this road. Luckily, Peter was driving. You need to know that Peter is a hobby level 3 race driver. Going downhill, he actually managed to get 30 kilometers back. He didn't know where the brake was. Well, essentially we arrived in Porto, and we did a lot of learnings, and range anxiety is a real thing that to me became really, really obvious in this particular situation. Yes, it did, absolutely, absolutely. And the picture I showed you earlier, where is it? The worst charging experience ended up with the best coffee and the best ham sandwiches, right? Well, so for this, that was an exciting trip for us. I think it shows really that there's lots of opportunity to improve charging infrastructure. And part of that is really goes back to data, how we use data, how we expose data, how can we create maybe an environment that essentially improves all these experiences around the car, right? So with that, I would really open up the panel that we have today on this. And let me invite Adam Woolway from Parkopedia, who's also the co-founder of Plug Surfing, and Achim Henkel from Robert Bosch, who's the director of tech strategy and mobility. And last but not least, Rolf Bienert from the Open ADR Alliance, who is the managing and technical director. Good to have you. So, same question to you. You already answered it, but maybe just to break the ice, what was your best and worst experience on charging that you ever had?
I have to admit, I was cheating. I had a plug-in hybrid. So, the range anxiety wasn't so bad since I had a full tank of 10 gallons of gas, and that hybrid got me 350 additional miles, which was nice. But I think the experience maybe also plays into what we're talking about here, was that I tried to set up my car, because it had a simple plug-in charger, nothing intelligent. I tried to set up the car internally for my different rates. I was on a solar tariff in the US when I still lived there, and I had different rates during the day and at night. So I wanted to set the car, for this rate schedule to charge really at the times when I paid less for the energy. And that turned out to be quite a project, and I'm an engineer. So I had to go through one menu, set the times for the different prices, then go to a different menu to say when I want to leave the house, and then a different menu again, okay, at what rate should the car charge and things like that. And ergo, next day it wasn't charged. So I did that 3 times or so, and it worked. But a friend of mine had a Nissan Leaf early on, the old Nissan Leafs already more than 10 years ago. And we certainly got stuck on the freeway with that, because the 25-mile range reduced to 0 within 5 miles. So that was certainly not that much fun.
Yeah, my best or worst EV experience was when we did a first trial with one of the US Pioneers vehicles, which had been bought by Bosch, by my company, and we actually experienced what happened when we drive it on a test with 0. And this is not a good idea. So I can tell you, when you have really in this first generation of a US OEM, 0 on a high voltage battery, the vehicle is dead. And that means black, no opening, you have no ventilation, no dashboard, nothing. So this was a situation I always remember, and I felt very stupid, because afterwards we had to come up with a with the carrier to bring the vehicle out of the test track. So this was really, I feel not very comfortable at very low state of charge.
Thanks. I think I gave mine. Yeah. I don't know if you want to hear it again. I can say it word for word.
But maybe this one's also not working. All right. Adam, maybe you can share your view on how do you think the EV charging experience needs to evolve and what needs to change, especially on long distance trips like this.
Yeah. Thank you. So. I think so. EV charging is something which, when you look into it, is actually much more complex than maybe a lot of people give it credit for. So there's a lot of different user journeys when it comes to EV charging, right? So you have some people like the extreme use case, which you had, Matus, where you're going on a long distance trip and you need to charge up at high power chargers, and then you have a lot of other people who just going about their day-to-day life will probably charge up their car at an AC charging point when it's at 60% and maybe charge up whilst they're shopping and get it to 80% or something like that. So there's quite a few different use cases, and I think what defines those is then how desperate or how critical it is for you to find that charging point. So we look at it from a user journey now. It comes down to starting off the very, very simple, or what seems simple to us as people looking at it from externally, and that is finding a charging point. And actually, finding a charging point is still very difficult. Not necessarily if you don't know the area where you are, not because the charging points don't exist, but because the data on them is quite often wrong. So we end up with situations, for example, and this is quite common, where installers, for example, put a charging point in, go back, sit in their car at the other end of the car park, and then put in the details of where the charging point was that they installed, and forevermore that charging point is known then as the location of where the installer's car was parked and not where the charging point is. And if you extrapolate that over 700,000 charging points in Europe and North America, then you end up with a lot of bad data. So I think first of all we need to make sure the data is correct. I know there's a lot of people that are working on that. We then need to make sure that there's enough data exchanged so that we can see calculate wait times, so that you can also do good analysis on how popular charging points are. Is the charging point working? Is that in real time? And then after that, it comes down to that issue of how you then pay for charging. So is it plug and charge, or is it, or how much is it going to cost you? Which is something which is also an incredibly complex thing to understand. There's lots of variables in that when it comes to charging a car. And I think there's lots of things we can say here, but the trend overall is, in order to make a good user journey for EV, what you need to do is just make partnerships, right? So EV is still this huge emerging market which has huge amounts of teething problems. And the one thing which I always maintain is that these are not problems because of a technology in charging, but it's a problem because there aren't enough partnerships, and not everybody has the same agenda in how to make this work. And the way that we do make this work is working together rather than focusing on the technology.
Would you like to add something from your perspective?
I fully agree. Actually, we need an instrument how to improve the data quality. And this is actually what we are trying to propose now in the context of COVESA, where there is the EV charging group, where we need to have better location data, because we think that the vehicle is the best sensor we have outside in the country. So the EV is capable to locate on several centimeters where actually the charging was performed, because you can combine location and charging power. The same as also, you can now then select which charging slot is yours. So imagine you come to a site where you have 12 charging slots with even double charger, and you reserve one. Okay, which one was mine? Or they are even in 2 rows. We have on the left-hand side, on the right-hand side. So you are parking on the right-hand side, but there's none of those is yours because it was on the left-hand side.
Oh, we actually had that. We activated a charger and it clicked on the very right, and then we had to switch. So yeah, that's absolutely real. Yeah.
So this is the intention we want to gather together, and we think when we make it happen in an open community as we are here now, then this become reality, because we can work together in an open way, and everyone has then the best routing recommendation in the future.
Yeah, maybe I comment a little bit from the other side of the fence, since my forte is more the grid grid connection to the customer. And, we're talking about having these charge stations out in the middle of nowhere, right? Maybe at small coffee shops or gas stations. And, I think a lot of people don't realize that a lot of power is needed to run these systems, right? And the grid has major problems with that at this point. And I should preface that by saying I do not work for a utility company, nor do I want to defend their questionable strategies sometimes. But it is a fact that the utility companies are struggling with that. Take a target market in the US where the parking lot has 20 Tesla superchargers. That's literally a cable like this that has to go there. So it has to be built, right? So there has to be the infrastructure. And right now the utilities, I think, are still struggling with how to make this work. So there might be the need to really open the discussions with them and potentially even, see what kind of infrastructure could help the utility make this happen in these more remote areas where you want like a more than 22 kilowatt charger there.
Yeah, Peter was joking when we were in this village that it's not only a charger, it's also a heater for the village.
Yeah, and if you plug the car in, probably everybody else has no power anymore,
But quickly going back to what you said, in that particular situation, we were really happy that there was actually a charger, and it was, it turned out that it physically exists. Right, and it physically also outputs the power that it was telling us, right, in the system, which was like 50 kilowatts, right? We got a situation. The situation that got us into there was actually one of the Ionity chargers that we used before was only at 27 kilowatts. So we expected the charger to be 350 outputting max to the car. It was broken. We called the hotline. Yeah, they helped us. They they shut down the charger. Did a restart, or was obviously something wrong with the site. I wonder how many other customers run into that, right? So that's where I believe, some sort of a common data model, we come to that, I think, in the debate, where COVESA can help to establish a standard on how can vehicles really look at that infrastructure and judge the quality of the charging event, right? So not to be dependent on basically all these back-end systems, right?
Yeah, perhaps I can add a new perspective. We had just the joke. When you come to a village and you want to charge your vehicle, the village is dark because you have the vehicle. There's no power left. We think the other way around. So in 10 days, there is a grid breakdown, a blackout in US, and the village is happy, an EV is coming, and then the light is turned on. Because then you have the vehicle to home or vehicle to grid recharging, which is probably actually the stabilization of much problems we have today.
So Achim, as a tech strategy lead, do you see any exciting developments out there that can help us with this?
We see actually that we need to break the mindset. In the current mindset, we have the challenge that most of the OEMs think they get solved the charging problems on their own. I don't want to name any specific OEMs, but I don't believe this. As a tier 1 perspective, we think the problem is too big. And the big is like only the chance to have it in a collaborative way, that we need to come together in a new, let's call it collaborative area, which is open source, or at least it is a low barrier entry. And then we can change the mindset how to develop the future of our energy problems together. Because the other way around, I think any OEM will fail against those who manage, and we have in-house chargers network available already.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. So, and that's something which I find so fascinating about EV. So first of all, First of all, this is a huge mega trend which is happening, of course, where there's two really big industries who are both undergoing huge amounts of change, whether that's the energy industry going through the whole energy transition, etc. And then at the same time, you have the automotive industry who is moving into electrification, and that causes this big friction, and that creates a lot of opportunity for small companies like mine, Plug Surfing, which came up, in the past and was able to be a bit quicker and capitalize on that, on the slowness of the bigger companies and make an impact. But what we entirely need to see, of course, and that's interesting, is EV then becomes this ecosystem. You're quite right. We need to see much more interaction between the OEMs, the energy systems, the CPOs. And just to give you, something to think about that I always find interesting is if you look at from a charging perspective, if you think about what the OEM wants compared to what the charging point operators want, you end up with something completely different. So they're both working for the same aim, which is for electrification. But what the OEM wants is always to have available chargers. They always want to have empty charging points so somebody can turn up and then just plug in their car at any point in time. What the charging point operator wants on the other side is they always want their charging points to be fully occupied, right? Because that then for them is a wasted asset if that charging point is not being used. So how do we then think about, just for example, how do we think about making charging incredibly efficient? How do we make it so that you can have cars which are charging at a certain point and not having any wait time, and then keep the cars turning over so that they can charge up and the CPO can make the most amount of money? And I mean, there isn't really a clear answer for that at the moment, but it's just an example of how we need to think from everyone's perspective about how we can change this whole ecosystem and not just replace the engine with the battery, basically, in a car.
So Rolf, from the open ADR perspective and from the grid perspective, how do you see standardization moving along? What's the big thing that needs to change, and what other alliances do you see that can make an impact in that area?
Yeah, in fact, a lot of things are happening, and Achim, you mentioned V2G, right? Vehicle to grid, vehicle to building. There's a lot of discussions about that going on in the US, and as you can imagine, the coastal areas in the US, the people there are very open to these kind of things. They're willing to have some inconveniences when charging, but they're driving an EV, right? So that's cool. So the mindset of the people is an important factor to make it work. And from a standardization perspective, I mean, we're seeing really good progress with OpenADR being used, for instance, in over 100 different demand-side management programs in the US, Hawaii, Japan. Starting now in the UK here a lot, but I still feel like there is countries, and I'm not gonna name some of our home countries here, where the utilities are very reluctant to really talk to the customer, right? To interact with the customer. I come from telecom. It dates me a little bit, but in the 80s I was a technician, Deutsche Telekom, right? And if a customer wanted a phone, okay, here's your phone, we rent it to you, don't break it. That's it, right? If somebody wanted a second phone in a second room, literally the service guy I was with tried to talk them out of that. You don't need a second phone, right? That's where the utilities sometimes still are, right? So buy the power from me, pay me, and that's it, right? So they have to make this leap to the next step where they're working with the customers. Oh, you want an EV charger? Or we need more EV chargers here, so let's make this work, right? Let's work together to do this. And I think COVESA does a lot of work within the automotive industry. OpenADR has the connection. We are seeing OCPP going from the charge point management system to the charger. So there is already a good set of standards available, but we are still seeing the biggest competition in private installations, proprietary implementations. And I think that's what we are all here for, right? We're trying to push standards versus proprietary, and there is really still a barrier to get over.
So I think we have a lot of time, 5 minutes, for questions. So maybe we would take a couple of questions and debate.
Any question? Yeah.
Ladies first.
Actually, it's more of a curiosity because in the beginning of the presentation, you put your expectation for days of trip, how many charges, blah, blah, blah. And the only topic that was like a red X was 8 to 10 charges. How many charges were
14.
required?
We
Oh
had
my
14
God. Okay.
stops.
Okay.
Several reasons. First of all, because we like pain.
Okay, good.
Second one,
Interesting.
I think what really forced us to have even more charge stops was we did not have a charger at the hotel. So we had one here at the Hilton downstairs, but the rest of our hotels didn't have a charger, and it's a pain to find a hotel with a good charger that works with your subscription, all these kinds of things. Right? Yes, I'm aware there are websites that do this, so this seems to be changing, but it's not super convenient, at least not for me. Right? Yeah. We. And that's another good point. I think for first-time user, not techie people, when the system doesn't matter if you use the onboard or some other app, right? It's intuitive that it tells you to stop for 10 minutes sometimes, right? There's a reason for that, right? So there's like one stop is 40 minutes, the next one is just 10, right? Yeah, it depends on your settings and things like that, right? But there's an efficiency curve on how the car also is able to charge in a certain time and how much power, all these things, right? If you're not educated, and most people don't care about that, right? It seems to be not really intuitive to just leave after 50 minutes, right?
I'm not sure I understand why you set it to 80% actually rather than 100%. You wanna? Why did you set it to 80% rather than 100%? You can change that setting, right? And
well, typically, once you reach 80%, the charging power goes down massively, right? So for the last 20%, you need a lot of time, and you just want to,
All right, fair.
So the charging, you charge up fairly quickly between like 30%, 70, depends on the vehicle and so on, right? But that's where you save a lot of time.
My question to you and to the rest is this an EV problem or is this a non-Tesla EV problem? So how would your trip look like, Mateus, if you were driving a Tesla on a supercharger network? And you're driving Model 3, yes, so that's also to you.
Yeah.
Versus you're driving another EV, right? That's
So I can't speak for Matus, but assuming that there was enough superchargers along the road, then I think that you would have found it easier and probably been a bit more at ease because it's so vertically integrated that you don't really need to think about anything anymore, right? The car just does it for you, and you get there and you plug in, and that's all you need to do. But that then becomes a challenge for all of these non-EV companies, for all of these non-Tesla companies, is how do you then replicate that Tesla experience when you don't have the luxury of vertical integration? And that is why we need things like what COVESA is trying to do with data, what Parkopedia is trying to do in EV, where we unify all of the data and the payment systems, etc. That's created an industry basically in how we mimic Tesla. But I think the supercharger network would have been easier because they have that advantage.
Okay, let's do one more and then.
Jeremy Parker on Polestar. I'm just interested to know about the experience of when you were charging and reflect a little bit about what your needs were when you were waiting. Did you have any sort of reflections on, apart from the coffee there, but anything else?
So I can share my personal ones, which are different, and I think that's the challenge, right? It's different from person to person, situation. Are you with your family? Are you alone? Is your intention just to get from A to B fairly quickly? With an EV, it takes more time, right? There's no way around that at the moment with the battery technology and everything we have. So make the best out of that time, right? Can you do something in parallel while you're at the charger, right? It can be something simple as, if it's a 50-minute stop, if I would do this with my family, it takes me 20 minutes to get my kids out and back in, right? So no problem. And if it's a longer charge, you want to have food, right? So how can you make the right choices and make the trip part of your experience, right? I think that's, very different from everybody.
Yeah, just to end a little bit, there is actually a data model proposed, and we will discuss on this tomorrow at 10:15. So just plug in. And in this data model, your personal requirements will be kept. So there will be someone who wants to get a playground for the kids. There might be other ones who need just a baby changing room, because it might be a good comfort during driving. Or the other ones need a long parking place because there's a trailer at the end. So how to define these personal settings and your preferences as your private preferred choices, I think this is the challenge, and we need to come together, because the vehicle is the best sensor.
Okay, we're going to have to close. Thank you all. Let's give them a round of applause. Special applause to Matus and Peter for their drive down. Thank you for that. So.
And you can meet us downstairs later on. We have the car downstairs.
Yes.
Driving back then. No, but Charlotte and Louis are driving back.
All right. Okay. All right. Well, we're going to be very quick here. I apologize for running late. Thank you all for your inputs. And we're going to go directly into the next talk. And that is by Pedro Lopez he's the director of automotive with RTI. We'll give it a second just to move around here. And as Pedro comes up, we'll queue up his presentation, which is up. Just a real quick note of thanks to Pedro. Pedro's new board of director with COVESA. And, I'm amazed at the RTI organization. I met several of his colleagues at CES. We had a very brief but very enlightening conversation. And I'm thinking, this company has got it together. And so I'm really, really glad that they joined COVESA. I'm glad to have them in the stable of horses, driving VSS and driving COVESA forward. And so we're going to give the mic over to Pedro, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the importance of defining a comprehensive legal framework for the software-defined vehicle development. So there you go.
Thank you, Steve. So I will try to be quick. I know we are a little bit late, so I don't want to keep you so long. So coming to, there you go, sorry. What's RTI? So this is important to make sense to the whole presentation. So we have been really controlling the majority of the avionics defense market for real-time communication. And this is not new. We have been around for like 20 years. And these industries have similar issues that the automotive industry. They had to go into a transition where software was driving the innovation, and they were real-time critical systems. We are in the launching system of the NASA, for instance. We are in most of the programs in the US and Europe for defense, controlling airports. So we are really in critical systems. And when the industry, actually an OEM, came to us like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and required from us a research project to see if our technology will be fitting the industry. We are making a middleware. We will come to that. It was an obvious match. So for us, it was like, okay, love at first scene, and everything will work out as it has been working out in the other industries. So we did a little bit of understanding, and the journey that from the hardware to the software defined was similar to the one that we saw in military, in avionics. So that was an easy check. So we were like, okay, this is a massive transition. We have done these transitions in other industries. We are relatively small, but having a really powerful component for the industry. So everything matched. So we said, okay, let's go and start focusing on the next phase. The first part of this analysis, especially from a software component, was identifying the stack, the software stack for the software-defined vehicle. And that was relatively quick. If you have been here for more than a day, you have seen this one or something similar to this one. And for us, it was really easy. We're a middleware component. We have almost created our technology, the DDS technology, from the ground. So it was relatively easy for us to find our place in the industry. So we saw, okay, there is the middleware framework. There are interactions there, like AutoSAR Classic, AutoSAR Adaptive. We had to go and do our homework there, standardize both in Classic and Adaptive. We had to integrate with ROS2, and we have to do all the preparations for our product to be competitive. And we came to a definition of the software-defined vehicle based on our technology, which is this creating this concept of a data bus, is similar to a database. And this picture is really working well for us with the traditional market. This was relatively easy in the early stages, especially with the new EV markets, where we are dominating the majority of the new EV commerce, are working with our technology as their backbone communication protocol. So it was time to go to the traditional market. And there, the software-defined vehicle, I will not stand myself too much here, but if you have seen any one of the presentations, have a lot of advantage to the industry. So this is not something new. Everybody's talking about this. It's the performance, the safety, cybersecurity, the advanced applications. And we wanted to even explore, because our product is a product that is really related to the business outcome of the solution. So we did an analysis on, okay, how this translates for the end OEM and which are the areas that we can work. So we have been doing analysis and providing products for the main 4 pillars, from the mobility as a service to the OEM differentiation, ecosystem, and digital disruption. So that was something that it has been extremely effective for us in the newcomers, in the EV newcomers. When we are now in the next phase, which is the traditional market, and this is a little bit controversial topic, but we see that it's relatively new. They have been operating systems, they have been different kind of software into the vehicle, Bluetooth stack, Wi-Fi stack, V2X stack. But the kind of software that we are designed to bring into the vehicle, that's really new. And for some software company from the Silicon Valley that we have been working in many programs where it was mostly software driven, that's a first reaction that we have been perceiving over the industry in the last years. The second part is cybersecurity and safety, and we will go deeper into that and why this is an important topic on the legal spec. They're not trivial. They are extremely well explained, and you can go to the TÜV and get your training. But when you go and contextualize it into a program, the OEMs really many times do not understand the cost of integration of some of these software components. And that's increasing a lot the risk of that component and therefore the liabilities. We will go a little bit more into that. And last but not least, the business model. When you look at any hardware vendor, which is in a program, you're talking in the millions, multi-million programs, you have a revenue exponential growth. When you start negotiating with the OEMs and the tier ones about the software component like ours that run in the whole vehicle, the estimation on the cost of ownership and the value of the software, is not there. And this is extremely difficult for an organization like ours because liabilities and warranties don't match with the revenue expectation for solution like the ones of middleware, or so it comes like as a surprise. So when we did that, we arrived to this point, and like 2-3 years back, we started to work with the OEMs. We started to realize that there are 2 paradigms that they make really hard for solution companies like ours that provide a product that is extremely important to the OEM and the tier 1, but they are not large enough to come into the industry. And there are basically 2. The difference between hardware and software. So hardware development and software development are completely different in the expectations from the traditional OEMs. And there's another problem that we are facing a lot, which is the differentiation between industrial and automotive. And it's this concept of the software-defined vehicle is a mobile phone on wheels. That's really hurting us a lot. The perception, because there are many of the OEMs and tier 1s that are getting software engineers that do not have experience in automotive, because these are all the software engineers that are right now in the world. They're not 20 years old, experienced, embedded software engineer with ISO 26262 and 21434. And the conceptual design and analysis of the vehicle is done from a device, an industrial device. So we went and started to work with many of the OEMs on trying to explain them that qualifications for hardware like the ICQ 100 that you define and the ISO 26262 that they have components for hardware, as well as the development phases that you have really well established, especially this phase where you have the PPAP approval and the start of production, they do not apply to hardware. And when you are getting the contracts from the tier ones, for the OEMs for a software component, they look exactly like the ones that they send to the hardware folks. And that makes it really, really complicated to be independent in the industry. At the same time, the industry talks about collaboration. COVESA is a great example of it. But when it comes to really collaborate factually, there is no collaboration because you cannot even get into the door of some of these OEMs. So we started to sit with them, and this is one of the phases we are now, and I start to talk about, okay, in that picture, how many software suppliers are you seeing? If you're seeing one, then we go back to the tier one model, and that's it. If you see several, what's the nature of those suppliers? Are suppliers that are specialized in an IV application and might be a 500 people company, extremely specialized, agile, that can give you what you need? Or again, we are talking about the one. Because if we are talking about the one, then we will need to integrate with the one. Who is owning the IP? And that's, if anybody of you follow yesterday the AutoSAR presentation over there, even gentleman presenting here, it was a question like, who owns the IP? What can we and what can we not do? What if we are working on a DDS native application with an AutoSAR application on a tier one? Where do we set the IP ownership? At which level? Who is in charge of liabilities and warranties? Are you gonna be forcing organizations such as ours to the same level that tier ones, or are we understanding the agility and the model that you're requesting us? Because we are fine to have one deliverable, but if you want deliverables every 24 hours, how do we manage this contractually? It's not simple question. And then the magic of the over-the-air update. Is this really a solution or a problem by itself? Are we compensating the quality of the software, claiming over-the-air update, or are we improving the quality of the software because we have over-the-air update? In the EV newcomers and in the trucking industry, this has been really easy, the transition, because they have a much more agile industrial mentality. In the traditional OEMs, this has been presented as a big problem. So let's go a little bit deeper. So when they tell us, but you are working on ASPICE, and we are like, yeah, but what about this? So we have Renesas, we have companies like here, they are giving you a complete profile on temperature operation on their system. When we are giving you ASPICE, what happened when the car is in Portugal in summer at 150 degrees, you know? Who is categorizing the performance of our software under those conditions? Is it the OEM? Is it the tier one? Should we be the one doing that? Because if that's the case, then we need to update the development phases. That's not there, and the hardware vendors have it. So if you are asking me for certain performance limitation, then we need to create a framework for that performance to be analyzed. And we need to have the cooperation and define during the development process gates that will allow us to validate those concepts. Because if we don't do that, then we are going to end again with the one supplier, the tier one, and that's it. There is another part where we were talking like ISO 26262, but we can reduce a lot the liabilities with ISO 26262. But then when you read the small letter of ISO 26262, the majority of the software vehicles and the software vendors are doing safety element out of context, where you are doing a lot of assumptions. There are a lot of implications to the assumptions that you are making. Obviously, you can contextualize it really well, and there is a work behind. But when you are integrating our solution from a low-level ECU from Tricor on Safe RTOS, and in the high-performance compute from NXP or from NVIDIA with QNX or Linux Auto, those two systems are running our software with a safety element of context in completely different environments. So there is a phase there that we need to understand. And when you are telling me that you might be updating your safety domain weekly, then we need to understand what does it mean for here. If you're adding functionality, if you're not adding functionality. So it's more about creating the framework, the supply chain framework, rather than coming directly with the contractual agreement at the front. There's another level, which is the cybersecurity. I don't know if you're familiarized with 21434, but WP29. Those are terms that are coming. They are development concepts, corporative concepts, and you need to work on them. But at the same time that you're opening the gate, you are opening the gate for the black hat as well, not only for the white hat, not only for the developers. And if you are saying, okay, but I can compensate that with opening the over-the-air updates, one of the aspects that we are seeing is, okay, what's happened with the performance? We are doing relatively open tests, agriculture, construction, and mining. We have private networks. We can run all of this. We can have the ISO 21434, they have their network, they control it over. But in the mass, how do you do roaming? How do you do security? How do you provide the scalability? And those are problems that we are seeing every day when we are working with these vendors. The legal framework will not solve you that. Unless you are able to start your design with a comprehensive analysis of the evolution, we will end with, again, the tier one. And the last step that we are now working a lot with them is, okay, how does this phase look like? And this, I must admit, this is something that we have seen a huge improvement in the last year. They are much more understanding of the different sprints, where you have updates once per day, once per week, once per month, once per year. This is improving a lot, and the definition of those is improving a lot. So the big question is, are we going to be working in this way? Because if you look at the news, I don't know how many software vendors are independent anymore. We have seen a lot of acquisitions. It's like our CEO say, the acquisition of the week. So we see acquisitions all the time. So, but at the end, the OEMs, when we talk to them, they love this model. So there is a misperception on, do we want to work with the one, and therefore we need to sit and be part of a tier one or have a single solution tier one that consolidate all the risk? Or do you want to benefit from a cooperative environment where you can have a provider integration, a service provider, and being working with all of them on a single component? Because if you just look at the hardware and the high level of specification, ISO 26262, all the terms that I have been showing here, you will think that this is the case, but in reality, it's not the case. And the last, where we are right now with many of the OEMs, is defining this chain, like IP ownership, liability, and warranty. All together, so if you think even from where I have been starting, like development phase, operation, qualification, real-time operation in real conditions, this is the biggest issue that we are facing right now. The terms and conditions of the software companies, which are, like our case, really specialized in providing a solution, how do you, in a business terms, are able to justify that? Because all of this need to be making sense business-wise, and this is not a simple math, especially on solutions like ours that are spreading over different environments. We are not running just in a high-performance compute system or in an ECU. We are running all over the vehicle. So having a comprehensive understanding and making the decision of, okay, where do you want to stand your supply chain in terms of, in the RTOS space, Winston now is independent, but there are few of them now these days that are independent. In the general purpose, same thing. In the middleware, I think we are the only one fully independent, which has not been invested, all the others are. So there is this trend going on, and the only impact that it's going to have for the OEMs is that they're going to lose their competitive value of working with individual vendors and optimizing their solution, because they are just going to have the one. So just finishing, because I know most of us want to go down to see the great demos. So what's the conclusion? We are a small company, but we have been in critical system for a long time. And we know we can provide the solutions, but if the software is at the core of the innovation for the OEMs, we need to really understand which setup they want us define, because otherwise they are going to end really impacting negatively the supply chain. Because even the startups, in the hardware vendors, if you get a couple of programs with the OEMs, then you can replicate that success relatively easy, and the revenue will come, and the insurance will be going there to insure your business. But in the software space, that's much harder, especially being an independent organization. When you had changed the paradigm, we need to all see it, and COVESA is a great place to see it and say, what is the impact on the traditional supply chain? Are we understanding models like VSS? They're easing the way, because we can define a program based on VSS and then bring it all the way down to the supply chain. That reduces the risk, because that means that we are all developing based on a single model. That has a lot of value for software companies. You don't need to have a massive force, an army of services engineer contextualizing at every single customer all the signals. You can focus on trying to reduce the risk at your end. So derived from all the challenges and the implications that I share with you today, it's really important that the OEMs and the tier ones and the suppliers, we define a comprehensive supply chain framework that might end like with hardware, with the tier one consolidating everything, and even in the hardware level, you have Cypress being acquired by Infineon, Marvell being acquired by NXP, so you have the acquisition of the day as well, and that's how it's going to be, but we need to understand that. And then once we understand which kind of supply chain we can have, adequate the IP ownership and the liabilities to it. Because otherwise, what's going to happen is that the major difference between the traditional hardware design and the software co-development, and we see it in companies like Carrier developing their own software teams in-house to accelerate and all of that, they're going to be so important that we are not going to be able to develop. And that's some of the parts that we are seeing as well, even in the traditional market. There is slowdown on development and innovation as they move to the traditional market. So we are working with different OEMs into that because they have understood as well, okay, we need to see whether there's value on us to have these single vendors that don't lock us into a single tier one, all the development of our software-defined vehicle, because there is value on externalizing some of this, and working on liabilities, warranties, and reliability together with them. So that's it. I have been quick to try to compensate for the delay. So is there any question?
Thank you for the presentation. So the question is, so basically, do you think that going forward, there is more openness on the side of the OEMs to establish more of independent relationships with software providers? Because being a software provider ourselves, right, normally we have to work or cooperate with tier one, tier twos, and pretty much work through them in order to get into the car, instead of having any kind of, direct relationship and contractual agreement with the OEM.
So I think environments like COVESA are essential for that to happen, where vendors like ours can talk directly to OEMs not in the context of an RFQ or a program that is already scheduled, but in the context of trying to transform the industry. So there are different OEMs that are part of COVESA that are coming to us and telling us, hey, will you be in favor of doing this or doing that? Could you facilitate this kind of integration? And I think that's essential. If we are in the context of a program that is already scheduled and it's a moving valid, then it's going to be extremely difficult. But in environments like COVESA, that can happen. And that's why it's so important that not only the major organizations join, but organizations such as RTI are part of it as well. So they can influence and show the value of working with a more heterogeneous environment, not just with a closed ecosystem of one-to-ones.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. Maybe to comment on that, what I think is missing is the transparency along the supply chain. So currently, I mean, we integrate all kinds of software, open source software, everything like that on the stack. Nobody has a clue which software is running in which vehicle, in which version, and it even becomes a nightmare if you do over-the-air updates. So I think the first step must be transparency, who is providing which part of the stack. Then you can talk about liability, IP, and warranty-related topics, because you need to really identify who is responsible. Just think about these new legal aspects like Cybersecurity Act and stuff like that. If you discover a bug in an open source component, you need to be able to trace back where is it actually used in the software stack and who is responsible to fix the problem, for example.
We see an advance into that front with the software bill of materials. So there are a lot of trends now that they will be standardized and mandatory for OEMs. So I totally agree with you. Without a strong software bill of materials setup where it is extremely clear the version of the software, from the safety manual to all the components that are part, it's going to be really hard to identify risk and especially to make a business case. This presentation is, I'm not a lawyer, I'm directing the business unit, so it's focused on the business side. So it's really important that we understand that the business side will not make sense until what you mentioned, like we figure out transparently what are the components which are in the program, the software-defined components, and creating that software bill of material that is maintained and that is rigorous and that you can be audited for it, and that you can see, okay, this is the actual software that is currently in the vehicle, and somebody's auditing that, and having the unit testing and all that continuous integration framework. But I definitely agree, until that does not happen, it's going to be really hard to have a comprehensive legal framework. Okay?
I have one question. Because, you know, people think of COVESA, oh, they're the VSS guys, they're the technologists, right? But we're purposefully doing these business tracks because we're also a business organization. What, if anything, do you think we can do as a collaborative community to engage the purchasers, the lawyers, the buyers, the sellers in this sort of a dialogue to create this framework that doesn't exist today?
I think this is a great question. From our end, we need to understand exactly which one of the problems we want to solve. That's the first thing. Continuing with the previous question. Do we want to solve the way that in a model like VSS or any other model, when you have the data model or structure of your car with the different software component, there is clarity and transparency that can create then a risk analysis and therefore a liability guarantee and deep analysis in those terms. If that's the first step, and I think that we have the structure to start working more into those business domains, not only in the technical domains but in the business domains. And once that's done, then we can try to understand the liabilities, the guarantees on a realistic environment. And that's, I think, it will be the next step. But without figuring out the structure, it's going to be really hard to figure out the liabilities and the other terms. So I think that COVESA could be a great place as well to evolve towards having working groups or other kind of groups that are looking at this kind of problems. Like, how do we have a communication vehicle, a structure, software structure, defined and properly maintained over the lifetime of the vehicle? Definitely.
Yeah, a quick history lesson here. When we launched Geneva around open source software back in 2009, one of the first things that we did was we did legal roundtables with all the OEMs and tier ones because nobody knew what to do with open software licenses at the time. They'd never introduced them into the vehicle. And so I guess what I'm saying is we have a history of engaging in these sort of discussions, even with lawyers and purchasing departments and so forth. And so again, back to the member-driven orientation of COVESA, if there's people in this room that would like to, bring a project into a one-pager and bring it to COVESA, we would welcome that, and even in this business context. So, anyway, thank you for making up for lost time. We apologize profusely for the missteps earlier in getting the right presentations and the right videos on time, and so sorry about that. We will do better tomorrow, but for now we are going to transition to our very famous and exciting showcase, which is going to be further downstairs in the -2 in the ballroom. So we welcome you all to go down there. I think it starts at 5:30, which is in 7 minutes, and so feel free to go down. Maybe they'll let you in early. Tell them Steve sent you. And maybe you'll even get a free drink out of it, okay? So thank you again, Pedro.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining, and have a good evening.